Thank you for joining us today, this Crisis Coach webinar. Today we're going to be discussing, and we have a crisis leadership conversation with our president of Firestorm, Jim Satterfield. Keep in mind that this presentation today is sponsored by the Greater Rochester Chamber of Commerce and also by the Eastern Great Lakes chapter of the Association of Contingency Planners. Tried to do that in one breath. I should have taken one between it. We'd also like to have you become our friend. Firestorm Solutions on Facebook. You can follow us on Twitter, Firestorm Sol. There is a hashtag. That hashtag is Crisis Coach. Firestorm transforms crisis into value and empowers you to manage risk and crises. Firestorm expertise is crisis management, critical decision support, crisis communications, crisis public relations, and consequence management. We do want to remind you that today's presentation is not complete without the accompanying oral comments and discussion, and this information should be discussed in conjunction with advice from your organization's personal counsel. Do not interpret this information as legal advice or legal opinion. As I mentioned, the webinar series is underwritten by the Greater Rochester Chamber of Commerce and the Eastern Great Lakes chapter of the ACP. This is the Founders Forum, Crisis Leadership Conversation. This is number 10 in the 2016 Crisis Coach series. You can go to webinars at firestorm.com and watch webinars in prior years and even prior months in this series and get that information. You can also register for future webinars. The Association of Continuity Professionals, used to be, it's continuity, it changed the name and it confuses me all the time. We have
Bill, the right name's up there.
The right name is up there, the Association of Continuity Professionals. And we have with us today Sherry Vale, who is going to give us some comments. Dr. Redmond asked her to step in for her. Sherry, over to you, please.
Thank you. Happy Thursday, everyone. I'm Sherry Vale. I'm the Public Relations Director with Eastern Great Lakes Chapter of Association of Contingency Planners. We specialize in cyber information security, business continuity, disaster recovery, and crisis management. Back in the fall, in September, we had a successful conference and had over 60-some people. So we'd love to have future members attend our annual conference and join our group. Our chapter currently welcomes new members. If interested, you can get in touch with Dr. Michael Redmond, our president. Her number is 917-882-5453 for more information. Again, that's 917-882-5453. Feel free to join, and we also have a holiday party coming up this November. I'll turn it back over to Jim and Bill.
Thanks, Sherry, and it's a great opportunity to network with your peers. The Eastern Great Lakes Association of Contingency Planners meets on a monthly basis, moving between Rochester and Buffalo, and it's a great opportunity for you to network and get other support as you're dealing with your job. Good to speak with everyone again this month and talk on the subject. And when we think about crisis, I would like to stop us and think about what comes to mind. You see a lot of pictures across the top of your screen there on the slide, and certainly those images could easily be perceived as a crisis in a variety of ways. So we're going to look at what's been going on over the summer and into the early fall and try to draw some conclusions about where our interests should be. What should we be doing at this particular point in time? Now, when we think about the word crisis, it's that turning point, and afterwards, things will be different from that point going forward. And that's really what we want to zero in today on what it is that you should be doing before, during, and after an event in thinking about what the worst disaster that comes to mind in your organization, in your family, as you look at that. Now, on your screen, you should see a bunch of dots. Some are white, some are gray. trying to figure out which one of those is going to represent the worst disaster. It's kind of hard. They all look like they could be any and everything. But if one emerges and suddenly it's that red dot that should be appearing in the front of your screen, the worst disaster is the one that strikes your business or your family. Because at the end of the day, this is personal. It's about what's happening within your organization. And today, if there's not that recognition, if it's not happening to you, we all tend to just kind of step back a little bit and watch those events slide by. But if it changes and does come back and impact you directly at work or directly at home, it suddenly starts to dominate your thoughts, and that disaster has the ability to expand and to grow and change your organization forever. To have those types of impacts, that's the whole reason when we think about planning on any level, be it cyber or violence or just business operations with supply chain, all of the elements start to come together. So today we want to break apart what's been happening in the news, what we've been seeing around the country, give you some insights, and then give you some steps to take that can make a difference and change the outcome. Because obviously with that type of a domination, as that disaster spreads, as that crisis escalates, it can have a significant impact on your organization. So the first category of crises that we've seen a great deal of over the last few months is violence. When we think about the worst disaster, violence suddenly comes into play. We've seen shootings occur in a variety of settings, from schools to police shootings to malls to clubs. It seems to be prevalent in a great many locations. The shootings down in the nightclub in Orlando triggered a series of other concerns, and from a number of fatalities, that now ranks as the largest workplace violence episode in the United States history. We also have seen this come into shopping malls. The shootings that occurred up in Washington State in the cosmetics counter. You think about going to the mall and Macy's as a safe event that would be easy to do in any particular area. Similarly, unfortunately, we see shooting episodes remaining in our schools. And there was a story that really is somewhat troubling when you think about it, and that's the shootings that occurred last month in South Carolina at a school. It was a 14-year-old boy who'd killed his father at home, took the car, drove to school, and stopped and got out. And at that time, recess was being held by a fourth grade class. He opened fire on that class. He shot 2 students and a teacher. The teacher who was shot was able to get the students back inside. As the alert went out, one of the first responders overpowered the 14-year-old young man, getting the weapon away and getting him into custody. As you know, we speak on a variety of topics, and Firestorm employs retired Secret Service agents and FBI agents to do assessments and work on plans and trainings. And one of our people got a call from the media to comment on the shootings there in South Carolina. And he agreed to do so, and they were setting up a time to have the call come in. He was then contacted back by the media organization and said, no, we're not going to do a story. It was not a big deal. Think about that. A shooting in a school, and quote, it's not a big deal. As you follow the news around that shooting, and later, one of the children, a little boy in the 4th grade, died as a result of the gunshot wound in his leg. It hit an artery. The hospital could not save the young man, and he died. It just wasn't a big deal. Could you imagine the impact on that family hearing the phrase, that just wasn't a big deal. It was only 2 children shot, and one of them died. It's the worst crisis you're ever going to see. The worst disaster you're ever going to see is the one that impacts you, your family, or your company. So today, unfortunately, we've become a little jaded with these events. It doesn't even have to be a gun when we think about violence. In Minneapolis, there was an attack in a mall with a knife, and an individual running around stabbing people. We've had just downstate from you in New York City, the terrorists in New York and New Jersey planting bombs in those areas. We've even had clowns clowns appearing in our schools around the country. It's a hoax that had been come and put up and obviously sent out on social media to play up those elements and encourage students to tell the clowns what it is they wanted them to do when they came. One school that we dealt with in a school district is they had reached out to the junior high schools to say, what do you want? And the students started listing which teachers they wanted to have killed or which sexual acts they wanted to have done. It shows that we live in different times. We certainly had the police shootings that have occurred, and the questions about was it the correct thing to do, was it incorrect, did the police act in an appropriate manner? And many of those things led to civil unrest. We've seen demonstrations in city after city around the country. So violence is an overwhelming predator. Just like that shark in the picture in the background, it's out there. It's just waiting to be recognized and to strike. As you think about your plans and as we focus on those, today violence, workplace violence prevention, recognition of behaviors of concern before that gun comes to school or work becomes a critical element for all of us. But over the last few months, we've seen this continue to maintain at a high level and even increase. Now, natural disasters, and for those of you in Western New York, here's a news flash, winter is coming. And having lived in Buffalo for several years, decades and decades ago, I know what those storms look like. And we were talking with Sherry just before we got started today about the lake freezing and the impacts associated with that. So winter storms are a part of your culture and who you are and what you know how to do and prepare. We've had the news dominated over the last several weeks around the hurricanes still coming up through the Atlantic, and specifically Hurricane Matthew. And I want to come back and make a point. If you look at the beach house that's right there, and you see it setting up, it's right on a point. The rocks are to keep the ocean back, and you can go down those stairs right onto the beach and enjoy. In the bottom right-hand corner, you can see the waves. But imagine the impact on this beach house as those waves move toward the rocks, as they move over the rocks, and a storm surge 20 feet high comes and attacks that house. Will it be there? Will it not be there? And for the owners of the house, it's very personal. This is their home. This is their opportunity. So as you think about the event, again, how does it come back and relate to my company and my people, and what is it that we need to do? So whether it's violence or natural disasters, those are crises and threats that are around us. We also think about cybersecurity breach, and we hear about exposures repeatedly in each of those areas. Unfortunately, we can't take a lock and lock up all of our information and have it safe and secure. Whether we're talking about personally identifiable information, PII, or PHI, personal health information, or HIPAA required information getting out as subjective, all of those are at risk, including intellectual property, access into your accounting and finance. We've seen all of those elements attack across the country. When we think about these elements, many times the focus is on the information security, the IT department within your organization. But a cyber breach is a business crisis. It's going to be, what is the impact on our company, on our customers, on our employees? What will happen as a result of that? How do we manage those particular areas? So when you think about a cyber breach, think about it more as a business crisis and less as an IT crisis. We see in many of these cases that the breach comes in via critical supplier. So even if you're a small customer, your clients may be looking at you at what programs do you have in place and what elements of protection that you have. Just as we talked about earlier in violence, and we talked about warning signs and behaviors of concern that could be identified before it escalated to violence, the same thing is true here. The majority of breaches that we find have as their root cause a human failure. The acronym PICNIC, problem in chair, not in computer, the letters from PICNIC spelling that out, is really what we find is a common theme. Someone clicked on an attachment, someone went to a site, someone had the ability then that malware was downloaded as a result of that, and the keystroke loggers were there. And the average length of time that the criminal is inside of your system is 240 days. When you look at that, imagine the amount of information that could be taken, or rerouting of financial funds and impacts. Certainly from a crisis, cyber breach ranks quite high. We also have seen brands impacted greatly over the last few months. Wells Fargo, in fact, I noticed today that the president and CEO of Wells Fargo has finally been forced to resign over the response and the occurrence in that event. We have 5,300 loan officers who open accounts in the names of their customers without their permission, and then get bonus checks and promotions as a result of it. Certainly is a loss of confidence within the organization, and will certainly change people's perception of Wells Fargo. Samsung has had its host of problems. The exploding Galaxy 7 cell phone. Last week you saw a plane in South Carolina still on the ground at the gate where the phone burst into flames and melted through the floor of the plane. They got everyone off, but imagine the impact had that occurred in the air. So now there's a total recall of all of those. Think about the financial impact on the organization. By the way, just last month, the freight line that was bringing the ships in with all of the Christmas sale appliances, TVs and others for Samsung, filed bankruptcy, and the ships turned around. So the entire stock for Samsung for Christmas may not make it into the stores, the long-term financial impact. By the way, that reinforces that the most common failure in a disaster or crisis that we see is supply chain failure. Now we think about in the upper left-hand corner our candidates running for president and the pressures of that election that are going on and the allegations and stories there. Is there an impact on brand from a result of those things? Absolutely. Last area to talk about is communicable illness. We saw over the summer the emergence of Zika. We're in fall flu season at this time, and so as we think about the absenteeism rate, we've seen in the past the avian flu, the swine flu, other types of global pandemics that are coming. But communicable illness is another element when we think about what could keep us up at night, what could be that great exposure. And again, it emphasizes the human element. When we think about any type of a crisis or disaster, there are four things that come in: loss of a facility, the buildings and locations that you have, loss of your information and technology, that's an IT disaster recovery plan or a cyber breach involved, or loss of your people. And that could occur from a violence episode or a communicable illness or even a natural disaster within that element. The three of those can be combined in various formats to create the fourth, which is a brand and reputation threat. So I wanted to give you some examples that we've been seeing here and looking at it. So what are the lessons learned? What does this mean to us now if we think about those things? First, that a crisis is not business as usual. It's business as unusual. And we're going to find out that in this crisis, almost everything you learn initially is wrong. So you have wrong and incomplete information, but yet you're forced to make a decision, and you're choosing between bad choices. Here's a bad choice and there's a bad choice. What is it that you want to do? So that's why it's important that you have a crisis management plan in place that says, this is how our company makes decisions. This is how we process that information. And then the second element of that is that every crisis is a human crisis. That's someone's son or daughter or mother or father or brother or sister. The impact on the family is going to be so disproportionate here. And as we think about our responses, we have to keep all of those things in perspective. Now you see two groupings of pencils on the screen, one in a jar and the other kind of down on the counter. But as you think about that, it's what's the perspective that will be seen by each stakeholder group, each individual that's involved. If you're only seeing one of those pencils, you may only see one color. But we're made up of a variety of aspects, and it's all personal. This is going to come back down to what does it mean to me? We're seeing increasingly now that Large customers are requiring vendors to have plans in place, to have them audited, to have verification that they're put in place and that they work and that they're tested. One of the best things that you can do is to test your plan to find out. We'd rather see it fail in a test than in a live event. If you can't do that internally, Firestorm runs virtual tests generally every other month for a chance for you to put your crisis team around and go through that crisis exercise. And you can benchmark yourself on where you are relative to other companies and organizations. So we framed it, crises happen, they have impacts, and they're both personal and extreme depending upon the level. What can you do about it? Where do you need to focus? Well, you're always going to have high visibility in a crisis. You're going to be under scrutiny, like the microscope that you see there. The term crisis stop is an acronym that helps to give you the ability to think about what you need to do, and this is a benefit that you can provide directly into your organization. By the way, if you find yourself or your organization in a crisis, pick up the phone and call Firestorm. We'll provide you support in that critical first hour at no cost to your organization to help understand what's going on and what you need to do. The first thing you need to do is stabilize the situation. Stop, slow things down. Let's figure out what it is that we know, not what we think, but what is it that we need to know in this point in time, and to bring some level of calm. That initial knee-jerk reaction in many cases is wrong, and it will lead us to say and do things that are incorrect. So the first approach in the crisis is to slow it down, let everybody take a deep breath, and then let's start to focus on what we know, not what we think. The second thing that you need to do is to start to figure out what resources do we need. Do we need to bring in counselors for our people? Do we need to engage our attorney? Do we need to contact our insurance broker? What do we need to do in this situation to be able to be prepared to handle it? What resources? Do we need to bring in an outside crisis management firm to help us and go through that process? By the way, if you're dealing with a crisis management firm, be sure to ask what crises you've managed, because it's not the time in your crisis to break a rookie into that particular area. The third thing is the opine on the exposures. What are going to be the consequences? What's going to happen next? And if you're looking to establish yourself at a strategic level within your organization, you make a prediction and the organization sees that come true, then you have credibility and carry that forward with the rest of your plans. But to look at the impacts, to predict what's going to be occurring next, is really what needs to be done. So first we stabilize, we slow it down, we stop it, we trigger, get the responses notified, get that support in place. Then we start to focus on what can happen next, the opining and predicting in the future. And the last step is, how do we avoid common mistakes and errors? How do we prevent this crisis from escalating? And we're going to share in a few minutes a series of do's and don'ts, things to be absolutely sure you do and equally things to be sure that you don't. So let's go back to stabilize for a minute. And your screen should be filled with buttons at this point. And the first thing that we would tell you is button up. We want you to not talk. Everybody generally in a crisis wants to talk about what they think occurred. They want to talk about that they've done everything right, that there are no problems associated with it. And you're going to find out, no, your people didn't close the valve. No, if you didn't test your plan. No, your backup wasn't appropriate. And that's why you see all the interviews after a crisis with people coming out. Nobody told us what was going on. And it greatly costs the company and the organization. So across the board, you need to have everybody button up. Everybody needs to close down and not communicate and speak with one voice when you're ready. It's those early communications that create significant problems. So the next about the resources and triggering them. You've got emergency things. You've got fire extinguishers and alarms. Get that word out. You've got to make sure that all the marbles are in the right spot. Do we have counselors? Have we identified who we could bring in? Do we have resources? Have we tested our plans to make sure that our insurance aligns with our exposures? We recently did a cyber breach exercise with a large financial institution, And then we took the exercise back to the insurance broker and said, how do the insurance policies interface with this particular scenario? And we found 6 of the 8 impacts that occurred in that cyber breach wouldn't have been covered under their cyber insurance policy. So understanding what your resources and tools are in advance and having them ready becomes absolutely critical. Next, the opining, what are the consequences? What would happen as a result of this? Can you identify your organization's next crisis? And the answer, in many cases, it's how you handle the crisis that's occurring right now. Your response is going to determine whether this calms down or it escalates into further damage to the organization. So we've explained the stop. We talked earlier about the causes. And that last piece said, well, prevent common mistakes. What is it that we should do? What is it we should not do? And let's talk through those. So we're going to give you a dozen things in each category of the do's and the don'ts. Let's go through the list. So determine who's the general. Who's going to lead your company's organization's response? Is it the CEO? Is it another member? In some cases, having the CEO as head of the crisis management team is a hindrance because there are others who will not tell the CEO that they're wrong. It varies by organization, but there has to be clear direction, and there can't be confusing messages. Your board can't be going one direction and the organization moving in another direction. So who's the general for the crisis within your organization? Second, ask yourself why before you make any communications. As you think about these elements, many times there's a rush to speak. Well, we got to get ahead of this. We've got to frame that issue. Let's go out and start to talk, and we'll get the words out now. Before you communicate in any way, we would encourage you to stop and ask why. And in fact, we want you to ask why 5 times. When someone comes and says, we need to get a message out, then you go, why? They give you an answer. And you say, why? They give you an answer. You ask it again. If you can go through that 5 times and they're good answers, yes, you should go ahead and communicate. But you shouldn't be communicating just for the sake of communications. Now, the one caveat is there are 3 types of communications in a crisis. The first is coordination. This is what we need you to do. Evacuate, shelter in place, lockdown, lockout. Those communications go out. Here we're talking about communications more in that second category, which relates to the crisis, the brand, the protecting of the image, of stabilizing the market. The last communications area in a crisis is compliance. Easy to see in a cyber breach. You've got to tell people whose information was stolen. You're going to see us return to the next theme of why media in a bunch of the other comments that are listed here. But you know how to reach your stakeholders. You know how to reach your employees, your customers, the businesses or residences around your location, or your critical vendors, or your shareholders and investors. Always communicate directly. Never communicate through a third party. Most of what you know in the first 24 hours is wrong. We said that earlier. It's going to be wrong, incomplete, and you don't have data. So that's a reason to slow and not make any communications early in the crisis. I'll give you some communications that you can make in just a few moments. You're going to get called from the media. Don't return the call. Take the information. Here's the reporter's name. Here's their affiliation. Here's their contact information. There is no need to return that call. In fact, if you get on the phone with them, they will say, I just spoke to, and they would give your name. And then anything they say after that sounds as if you said it. So we would encourage you, do not speak to the media. This is not the time nor the place. And make sure that all your people know that there's only one spokesperson for the organization, and that they're not authorized to make those comments and go. Anything you say can and will be used against you at this point. Now, once an event has happened, and particularly a physical event at your location, a fire, a tornado, a significant act, a workplace violence episode, the first responders, when they come on scene, they now own your building. They will control the site. And so they will take control of the location, not you. And one of the things you then will want to do is to have someone who's going to interface directly with them so that you have that information back. That will not be the head of your crisis management team. It'll be someone else, but you need to understand what has to be in place. Stick to themes. That's the home bases and message maps. You've often heard people go, no comment. The public interprets that as you're guilty, it's your fault, and you did it. So one of the things that we would encourage you to do are have home bases. There are 3 home bases that you can use in any disaster or crisis, and this is worth making a note about. The first is that you'll not be defined by the event. The second is that you'll invent the future. And the third is that you'll embrace the families. Whatever bad thing happens, it's not what your company is or your organization. You can look and say, you know, this is not going to define us as a company. What we're about is, and then whatever your mission is, whatever your company is about. Secondly, you're going to do everything in your power to make sure that an event like this never happens again. That's inventing the future and showing how you're going to make those changes and directions. And the last, though, is it's not about who you are, not about your company, but it's about the people. It's about those that were hurt or died at this point. And right now, our thoughts and prayers are with them. Those 3 home bases will get you through any initial communications contact that you need. Beyond that, you need to have message maps. And you can plan those out now with your crisis communications plan. What are the types of things that could occur? What's your first, second, and third message associated with each of those? The death of an employee, the death of a client or a customer at your site, an injury, a product recall, whatever it might be, you can plan those out because it's easier to edit than, in fact, to create. You've got to monitor social media. Now, the good news here is that someone in your marketing department is looking at your advertising. They're saying, well, we have this many click-throughs and we're getting these types of comments and observations. Today, the focus is on open source intelligence. And open source means looking at what's being said on social media. And there are tools that will help and empower you to do it. But social media is a primary risk management tool and needs to be linked directly into your plans in your organization. Because the statistics here are amazing. 80% of the time, if someone has ill intent, somebody else knows, and 67% of the time, 2 or more people know, and when they know, they talk. And where do they talk? They talk on social media, so you can get that information now. Also, you want a victim strategy. If someone's been hurt or died, the impact on them is going to be disproportionate. So you want to develop a strategy to support that family from the very beginning. Appoint representatives, and we recommend 2 in 8-hour shifts, a man and a woman, to handle any of the details that the family needs to help them through. And before you make communications, before you say anything about the individual involved, clear that with the families of the victims so that you're saying at their request we're not making a comment, or that here's the information and what they want to give out. If this gives you a basis not to communicate too early. So I've told you a bunch of things to do. What is it you shouldn't do? Well, don't say anything. Remember that first letter, stop, in those buttons? Tell everyone they're not authorized to speak. Just stop. That's going to create more problems for you than anything else. Do not talk through the media. In case that's confusing, don't talk to the media. I'll say it louder even in moving through that process. They have their own agenda. Media today is entertainment, and that's going to create a problem for you as this process goes on. Don't give numbers, dates, and times. Don't fall into a numbers game trap. Well, we tested it last month, and it worked. If you're explaining, you're losing, and you'll see that as a button a little further down to focus on. Once you start giving numbers, then the media is going to press for more and more numbers and qualifications. Stick to those home bases. Will not be defined by the event. We'll invent the future. We'll embrace the families. Don't put anything in writing. If you have to communicate, do it face-to-face or over the telephone. If you send out an email or a tweet or a blog post, then everyone's going to know those aspects. Where I talked about the 3 types of communications in a crisis, the first being coordination. Yes, you can put that out. We need you to remain where you are. We need you to evacuate. We want to make sure that that direction is clear and not cute. We worked with a church, and their command was, when they thought they had something of violence occurring, the florist is in the sanctuary. Well, that's stupid. You'd have to try to figure out, what does it mean? Just explain it directly, give that information, and let it go out from that standpoint. When you're explaining anything, this is why it happened, this is what we did right, you're going to find that you're going to lose in those areas. Don't forget anybody important, a donor, a regulator, a customer, shareholder, all your employees. Make sure you know who your constituents are at this time, and it will make it easier at the time of crisis. Don't succumb to the moment. If it's not a life safety issue, slow down. Time is your friend. You'll have time to deal with it. You don't have to send something out in the first 15, 20, 30 minutes or an hour. Don't turn over any documents to or computers to law enforcement or regulators until directed by your legal counsel. We've seen repeatedly where these devices are turned over not under subpoena, not under legal authority, creating additional problems within your organization. You want to have your legal counsel involved as a SME, a subject matter expert, to your crisis management team. Don't take the ownership of someone else's grief. You can't categorize their feelings. You don't know what it's like to lose that relative or that family member. And so if you start to talk about, well, it makes me feel this way, that's irrelevant. It's how it is to that family, to that individual. Remember the comment at the beginning when we talked about the fact that every crisis is a human crisis. You can say our thoughts and prayers are with you and your family. Don't rely on anything don't respond to anything on social media. We've seen individuals who are trying to then discredit whatever the comments being made. Well, that's not true. We did this. And you're going to find out that you're going to be wrong. Let the comments sit. The more you build on it and talk to it, the higher the SEO, the search engine optimization, and the more that comment's going to be seen. So you want to stay away from that. You want to be aware of it, but you do not want to respond on social media. And never, ever communicate through a third party. You want to communicate directly about, this is where our company is, this is, in fact, what's going on and what's occurring in those areas. So if we want to summarize that, just some general recommendations, you have to have a plan. You need a crisis communications plan. You need a crisis management plan to be able to direct those decisions. And that's in addition to all of your business continuity programs or communicable illness or workplace violence plans. A crisis is a different environment. You have different controls in order to make those decisions. There are always warning signs. What are they? Are your people trained? Are they able to recognize those behaviors of concern, whether it's something that's on a path to violence like workplace violence, or whether it's behavior that's going to let that cyber breach occur as a result of it. You need to have an anonymous reporting program in your company, and in today's workforce, that needs to also be digital. You need to have anonymous text reporting, and there are new tools out that will allow you to do it, and our younger workforce is now looking at typing onto their phone to send those messages out. You need a formal threat assessment team, a formal threat management team within your organization to deal with the behaviors of concern, but recognizing the importance of those elements, and awareness training for all of your employees, and involvement. Everyone needs to be involved. What are your support resources? Identify them in advance. That's the insurance broker, it's the law firm, it's the counselors, it's the forensics people that can help in cyber breach. It's all of those elements that could come into play. You must have an open source intelligence network. You need to be monitoring what's going on, because we're seeing these indicators out there, and if you're not, then you're going to be caught by surprise. Everybody on the call today monitors the weather, and particularly in Western New York, that can change and be suddenly a significant factor. For every threat, every risk that you've done in your risk and vulnerability threat assessment, your hazard impact matrix, what is your specific monitoring program and specific triggers for each one of the threats and risks that you've identified? Insurance plays an increasing role here. Pulling the risk manager within your company involved, getting your broker to confirm where the coverages are is a critical element, and there are new special coverages that weren't available several years ago. Whether it's active shooter or cyber or communicable illness, there are programs that can be put into place to protect the company. And last, train and test. You've got to train everybody. Everybody has to understand their plans and be able to carry forward. So next steps, update your risk and threat assessment. Think about what we've seen over the last 90 days with the violence elements, the natural disasters, communicable illness, brand and reputation. Those are all things and elements that should have a place, including the cyber, in your analysis. Make sure that your crisis management plan aligns with best practices. And it goes beyond just here's a what to do. It has to tell them how to do it. And if it's not that way, it's not actionable, and you're not going to align with best practices. And in general, if you're explaining you're losing in a crisis, you need to answer that. And that's where your crisis communications plan with very clearly defined home bases and detailed message maps for each of the occurrences that are likely to happen. So take that threat assessment, map it back down into your crisis communications plan, and put those messages down. Remember, it's easier to edit than it is to create. So having the messages in advance will certainly change the outcome. Contact Firestorm. We would provide you crisis stop support in that critical first hour, and we'll do so without rendering a bill. If you find yourself in a crisis, we would rather you call to avoid making those common mistakes that we've seen. Do an analysis of your insurance and your current response plans, identify those gaps now, and stress test your plan, whether it's an open session that Firestorm conducts every other month at no cost or a customized plan for you within your organization. There will be a brief available on today's webinar, as there is in each of the ones we do each month. You can go to our website and download the brief. It's listed under resources, and you can have this recording and access to those briefs or other webinars that have been done. So we would like to thank the Rochester Chamber of Commerce and the Eastern Great Lakes Association of Contingency Professionals. Any last comments that you want to share with us today?
Yes, Jim, I think you've made a few excellent points that are important to all of us with regard to the red dot, and we need to take a way to ensure to pre-plan and determine our leadership roles in advance. I think another excellent item was with regard to the legal contracts and ensuring that the insurance, there's DR plans in place, and tests are being done by our company's vendors. And as well, I thought it was excellent with regard to the button-up and streamline and minimize our communications. So I find those were all very beneficial to the group. And I'd just like to say a huge thank you from Eastern Great Lakes ACP. It goes out to Jim Satterfield and with the Firestorm organization for providing us this excellent presentation, as well as the others throughout this year in 2016. Really appreciate it.
Thanks. I look forward to being back in the area and sitting and talking in one of your meetings and answering questions directly. I think it's important that we're all in this together, that we're a team. These types of disasters and crises occur around us. We stop several times during the year to take a focus on what's happening. We've got things looming in front of us. There's been threats made at global levels between countries and organizations. There's an Irish blessing or an Irish curse that says, may you live in interesting times. We clearly are in those interesting times. We don't know when that next crisis will occur. Your organization looks to you to take the lead in that particular area. If you're viewed as tactical, you may not be sitting at that strategic table to make that decision. Focusing on crisis and the impact on your organization will help move you to that level of perception within the organization. Thank you for taking your time today. If you'd like to view this or other webinars, you can go to firestorm.com. If you've got questions, send us a note at webinars@firestorm.com or call us at 800-321-2219. We're going to make every attempt to reach out to everyone on the call today to answer questions. Have a great day and have a wonderful fall. And if you're in Buffalo, let's keep our fingers crossed that the lake freezes sooner instead of later. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. Goodbye.